So this video is intended to introduce you to the concept of methods or give you some new ideas of methods you might not have seen before. So a method itself is, by definition, it's a collection of statements grouped together that accomplishes a single task. And so the idea behind methods is that it is code that is grouped by itself that we can call or use from our main method. For example, some ideas would be calculate an average. So anytime we wanted to calculate an average, rather than doing it in our main code, we could call a method that does just that. It calculates the average. Or maybe we'll use a method that gets the prompts the user for their name. Or in our Sea Bubbles Hawaii example, we could use a method that calculates those hours, minutes rented. So why would we want to use methods? Method helps us prevents us from writing repetitive code. Anytime we see ourselves writing the same code multiple times, that's a good candidate for a method. It's never a good idea to repeat code, to write repetitive code. We always want to find a way, if we see ourselves repeating code, to put it in a method or put it someplace where we can call it multiple times rather than writing the code over and over again. So another reason is it's easier to maintain. If a change needs to happen, maybe a rate change, for example, changing it within the method is much more effective than looking through our main code, for example, our main class, and looking for all the occurrences of the rate change. Or maybe an algorithm changes, which is a more accurate or more beneficial example. So if an algorithm changes, we can change it in our method and not have to be concerned about how it's affecting the rest of our code, because it's just maintained within a single chunk of code, our method. There's this idea that's called encapsulation, a black box, and that's kind of what I just alluded to a second ago, and that is because that code is self-contained within the method, as the user using that method, you don't have to know the algorithm that went into creating whatever the outcome was. Like look at math.random. That's a method that you're running. It's a random is the name of the method. And you don't know how that algorithm is coming up with a random number. You just know if you use it, you're going to get a random number. Well, maybe the author of the random method changes the way they want to generate it. They change the code. They're going to generate it a little differently. You as the user, you're the one using math.random. You have no idea how that change is happening or what's going on in there, and it's not going to affect you in any way. And so that idea that in a method, code stands alone by itself, that if we're using it, we don't have to be concerned about the workings of it. We just know if we use it as agreed, as long as we know how to use it, we don't really care what the details are within the code itself, within the method itself. So let's look a little bit at what a method looks like. This is a method header is what it's called, and it sort of looks similar to what we've been doing already with our main. Public static void main, and then we had string and args, and we'll look at that in a little bit, what all that means. But let's look at all of these words, keywords in detail. So first of all, we have the word public, and public is called the modifier, and that is that lets the compiler know who has access to this method. In other words, is this method available just within this class that I'm writing, in which case it would be a private modifier? Or is it available to the entire world, like math.random? Anybody can use math.random. We use it, we import it into our code, and we use it. So that is a public method. But if we didn't want the world to have access to our method, we would give it a private modifier. So for now, we're just dealing mostly with publics, and we'll see privates as we go along here in a little bit. Static is a non-access modifier. It just gives us abilities to add other functionalities to our method. We're going to be using static for this chapter. Static simply says that we don't have to create a new instance of it. For example, when we use math.random, we're just calling the class itself, which is math, and its method, which is called random. We're not having to create any new instance of it. In other words, math is a static method. A non-static method that we use is we've used the scanner, where we have to create a new instance with that new keyword. We've created a new instance of scanner, and therefore that is not a static method, and we'll understand how that works when we start working with classes and objects coming up. But for now, in this chapter, we're going to use static, and static simply means I can access it just because I'm using it within the same class. So we'll see how that works in our example code in the next video. But that's what static is. We do not have to create a new instance of that class. Another example would be final, and we've used the keyword final when we've used constants. The next word is, in our case, in this case, it's void, and what goes here in this placeholder is the return type. So the idea with that is whenever I'm done running this method, am I going to return data back to the main method that called me, or am I simply going to do something and then return without sending any data back? And so void simply says, don't return any data. Just do whatever you're going to do within this method. And oh, I thought I had an example of that. And I'll have an example of that in our upcoming code. So void simply means just do whatever you're going to do in the method here, and then return back to whoever called me, but I'm not sending any data back. If I need to send a value back, I would declare the type of value that I'm sending back. In this case, I'm sending back an int. I'm going to return an int value. And so if it's, in order to utilize that, if I put a data type here instead of void, I must have the keyword return and return this data type, int data type, to whoever called me. In this case, I would be returning 0 because 0 is in this variable. So I would be returning 0, which is in fact an int. So you have to make sure that the data types match. Whatever you say is going to be returned needs to be returned with the keyword return. Notice when I had void, I didn't have a return. It's not necessary with void. But if I do put a data type here in the return type, I must put the word return and return a data type of value with that data type. This is the method name, and the method name is pretty self-explanatory, I think. That would be similar to random, like we were looking at with our math example. This is the name of the method this is what I would use to call this method, to call or invoke this method. Some good coding practice that you should follow is that we agree that the method name should start with a lowercase. It should, if there's two words in our method name, that the second name, the first variable of the second name, the first variable, the first, character of the second or third or fourth is going to be capitalized, the first letter. We also agree that this should be a verb that tells us what this method is going to do. So some kind of verb like print something or set a number or whatever, get a name, whatever it needs to be, but so that it is descriptive of what the method is doing and that it is usually a verb. Okay. The things that go inside our parentheses are called parameters. Parameters are optional. These are variables we want to receive into it's data we want to receive into our method, and the data we're going to receive is going to be put into the variables that are in these parentheses. You do not have to have parameters. They're optional. If you do not want any parameters sent into your method, just make sure you have the parentheses, but you don't have to put anything in the parentheses. So in this case, this method is not receiving any data. It's going to do whatever it needs to do, and it's then going to return an int in the case of this method header. If you want to receive something into your method, if you want to receive some kind of data, you need to declare that variable, just like we've seen before in our main methods. So you need to make sure that you give it a data type and that you give it a variable name. This variable name is then can be utilized in the method. Here we're printing out whatever was sent to this method, and it's a string. You have to make sure if you send something into this method that you do send a string. In this case, I can't send an int into this string. I'll get a compile error. So you need to declare it with a data type in the parentheses, and then followed by your variable name. Your variable name is then available to you just within this method. Once you leave this method, my string disappears. You will no longer have access to my string. You can send more than one parameter. In this case, I've sent two parameters. I've sent string my string, and then I've separated it with a comma. And here's a second variable that's coming in. It's an int, and in this case, this will be the variable that I can use. So I'm printing out, you notice the void, I'm not returning anything. System.out.println, printline, my string plus my int. Again, once I leave this method, those variables are no longer going to be available to me in the main. So I'd have to either return those values or do something else so that I can have access to it. And we'll talk about other ways to do that as we progress. So that's methods in a nutshell. Our next video will actually do some examples.